The Nanny, 1993 to 1999, wasn't just another sitcom, it was a 90s TV sensation. With Fran Drescher's iconic laugh, her dazzling wardrobe, and the hilarious chemistry of the Sheffield household, the show became a global favorite that still has fans binge-watching today. But what happened after the glitz, the laughs, and the quirky one-liners faded from our screens? More than 25 years later, the cast members have taken very different paths. Some continued thriving in Hollywood, others moved behind the scenes, and a few faced personal battles that shocked fans. From unexpected career reinventions to private struggles kept out of the spotlight, the lives of the Nanny stars in 2025 are full of surprises. Morgan Gilbert was born on October 16, 1928, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and in 1993, at the age of 65, she stepped into the world of the Nanny as Yetta Rosenberg, Fran Fine's absent-minded yet lovable grandmother. Yetta's quirkiness, chain-smoking antics, and constant confusion made her a fan favorite, her character a chaotic storm of comic timing that carried an undertone of melancholy about aging and memory loss. Off-screen, however, Gilbert's life was less whimsical. Raised in a family where affection was scarce and criticism constant, she learned early to mask insecurities behind humor, though it left scars of deep self-doubt. Her career was far from smooth. Before the Nanny, she spent years struggling to shed the shadow of her Dick Van Dyke Show fame, often turned away from auditions with whispers she was too old or too familiar. She suffered professional humiliation after being abruptly replaced on a Broadway production due to conflicts with a director who accused her of being difficult to work with, a reputation she never fully escaped. Known privately to be sharp-tongued and sometimes harsh with younger cast members, she carried a streak of bitterness about Hollywood's double standards for women. Her personal life reflected that instability. Her marriage to writer George Eckstein crumbled amid fights over money and his infidelities, leaving her with two daughters who later spoke of her emotional distance and volatility. In her later years, she endured multiple losses, including the deaths of close friends, which exacerbated her loneliness. When she died of cancer in Los Angeles on June 14, 2016, at the age of 87, she left behind an estate valued between $1 to $2 million, built mostly from television residuals and careful savings. But insiders often remarked on how little of her wealth was spent on herself. She was rumored to live frugally, sometimes bordering on miserly, as if forever bracing for the rejection that had marked her career. Ray Charles, born September 23, 1930, in Albany, Georgia, guest starred on The Nanny in 1997 at the age of 67, playing Sammy Yetta's smooth-talking boyfriend, whose warmth and playful swagger mirrored the magnetism that had made him a global music legend. To viewers, Sammy was a charming cameo, but Charles's real-life story was darker than the lighthearted role suggested. Blinded by glaucoma at age 7, he endured a boyhood of poverty, often mocked for his disability, and carrying the shame of feeling like a burden. His early career was brutal. Club owners underpaid him, bandmates stole from him, and rejection from mainstream labels fueled his descent into heroin addiction, which nearly destroyed him in the 1960s. Arrested multiple times for drug possession, he faced public disgrace, canceled contracts, and almost lost his recording license. The scandal of his addiction was one of the lowest points of his career, and though he eventually overcame it, the shadow lingered. Behind the charisma, Charles had a reputation for being controlling and combative in the studio, with musicians privately accusing him of manipulation and emotional cruelty. His personal life was a maze of scandal. He fathered 12 children with 9 different women, and though many admired his genius, his relationships were marred by infidelity, lawsuits, and estrangement. Several of his children accused him of neglect and using money to buy silence rather than affection. In his final years, he suffered not only declining health, but also the bitterness of friends lost and the weight of unresolved family battles. On June 10, 2004, he died at his Beverly Hills home from complications of liver failure at age 73. At the time of his death, his estate was valued at roughly $75 million, though its distribution sparked years of disputes. Each of his children was left $500,000 while the bulk went to the Ray Charles Foundation, igniting bitter resentment. The fortune cemented his name as an untouchable legend. Yet privately, the divisions and scandals revealed a man whose genius was always at war with his own demons. Spalding Gray was born June 5, 1941, in Providence, Rhode Island, and joined the Nanny in 1997 at age 52 as Dr. Jack Miller, Fran's therapist, a calm and articulate counterpoint to her neurotic whirlwind of emotions. On screen, he brought an understated gravitas, his presence a sly wink to audiences familiar with his monologue-driven career. But his real story was steeped in torment. Raised in a family overshadowed by tragedy, he never escaped the trauma of his mother's suicide, which haunted his adolescence and surfaced in nearly every work he wrote. His youth was marred by ridicule. Mocked for his odd mannerisms, he internalized shame that festered into adulthood. Professionally, he carved a niche in experimental theater, but the path was filled with collapse. Producers frequently called him unreliable due to erratic moods, and one infamous incident saw him walk off stage mid-performance after accusing a fellow actor of trying to steal the spotlight. He wrestled with alcoholism, was prone to explosive fits during rehearsals, and once alienated an entire production team by rewriting his own lines without approval. The darkest blot on his career came in the 1970s, when a long-whispered rumor about his brief involvement in adult films surfaced, nearly costing him teaching jobs and casting opportunities. His personal life was equally chaotic. His marriage to Kathleen Russo was marked by separations, and his affairs often spilled into public gossip columns, though he fiercely denied most claims. After a devastating 2001 car accident in Ireland left him with severe injuries and chronic pain, his depression deepened. He attempted suicide multiple times before January 11, 2004, when he disappeared from his New York apartment. His body was later discovered in the East River. He was 62. Gray's net worth, modest at under $1 million, belied his cultural impact. His journals and performances, leaving a legacy of raw confessionals that today read like warning signs ignored, the testament of a man consumed by the very honesty that made him an icon. Daryl Hickman was born on July 28, 1931, and he appeared in The Nanny in 1997 at the age of 66, stepping briefly into the sitcom world as Mr. Binder, a doctor whose measured calm cut through the manic whirlwind of Fran Fine's escapades. His character was little more than a passing figure, but audiences remembered him for the unusual restraint he brought to a series that thrived on excess. In reality, Hickman's life was an unsettling cocktail of early stardom and silent suffering. A child actor thrust into Hollywood's harsh spotlight, he was celebrated for films like The Grapes of Wrath, yet privately he endured relentless pressure, whispered mockery from industry insiders who saw him as a disposable child commodity, and the gnawing loneliness of fame bought too young. His career stumbled as he aged out of juvenile roles. Behind the polished image, there were bitter fallouts with directors who accused him of arrogance, a reputation for mood swings, and a humiliating episode in which he was fired from a mid-60s television pilot for refusing to follow direction, an event he later admitted shattered his confidence. Hickman even fled Hollywood briefly for a monastery, retreating from the manipulations of a system that had used him up. His personal life was equally jagged, marriages strained by ambition, relationships fractured by mistrust, and no children to carry his name forward. As the years passed, Hickman saw friends and contemporaries die young while he battled quiet depression and professional irrelevance. He returned sporadically as an acting coach, though even students described him as alternately brilliant and merciless. On May 22, 2024, Hickman died in Montecito at 92 from natural causes, having lived long enough to watch his youthful fame turn into little more than a footnote. At the time of his death, his estate, comprised mainly of modest real estate holdings and residuals from decades of acting, was valued at about $1 million, a humbling sum for someone who had once been positioned as Hollywood's golden boy. Zack Norman, born Howard Gerald Zucker on May 27, 1940, Joined the Nanny in its early years, appearing between 1993 and 1995 as Uncle Jack, the flamboyant, eccentric relative who embodied chaos and comic flair. At 53, he played the lovable oddball, but his off-screen life was stranger and often darker than any sitcom script. Born into a family that constantly ridiculed his ambitions, Norman spent his childhood cloaking pain in humor while facing taunts from peers who dismissed him as delusional. His career was a carnival of reinventions: comedian, actor, producer, and art collector. Yet behind the bravado, he developed a notorious reputation in Hollywood for self-promotion that bordered on mania. He purchased full-page variety ads to hype his own career, sparking ridicule from insiders, and endured humiliations when major studios dismissed his pitches as absurd. His greatest professional failure came with the disastrous release of one of his self-financed films, which critics tore apart, leaving him millions in debt and temporarily blacklisted from serious projects. In his personal life, Norman's marriages crumbled under accusations of infidelity and manipulation, and his children often described him as both dazzling and dangerously unpredictable. He compensated for professional rejection through art collecting, famously holding on to a Basquiat painting he later sold for $110.5 million. A move that secured his fortune but fueled suspicions that he valued art as much for status as passion. By the late 2000s, Norman suffered heavy losses in failed investments, and friends noted his increasing isolation, a man consumed by his own legend. On April 28, 2024, he died in Burbank, California at 83. Pneumonia tied to COVID-19 complications, ending a life of reinvention and bravado. At death, his estate was worth over $10 million, driven largely by art and property, a fittingly flamboyant fortune for a man who never stopped selling himself as larger than life, even when Hollywood laughed behind his back. Alan Rich, born Benjamin Norman Schultz on February 8, 1926, entered the Nanny universe in 1993 at 67, taking on the roles of Paulie the pawnbroker and later a judge, infusing both with the sharp wit and world-weariness of a man who had survived Hollywood's ugliest purges. To viewers, he was a character actor of comforting reliability, but his real life was a bruising saga of betrayal and survival. Blacklisted during the McCarthy witch hunts for supposed communist ties, Rich was publicly shamed, ridiculed in trade papers, and barred from film sets. A devastating blow that forced him to reinvent himself as a Wall Street broker and art dealer just to survive. This exile left deep scars, breeding a mistrust of colleagues and a tendency to lash out in private at those he believed had abandoned him. Though he later returned to acting with grace, whispers persisted about feuds he carried to the grave, especially with fellow performers who had cooperated with the blacklist. His personal life, too, carried a darker undercurrent, a marriage punctuated by bitter arguments, rumors of infidelity, and children who later admitted their father's activism often overshadowed their own needs. He was a man both admired and feared, known for lecturing co-stars, berating directors who cut his lines, and even walking off set in protest of perceived slights. His greatest humiliation came in the late 1950s when he was publicly named in hearings, his career crumbling overnight, an event he later described as the slow death of his identity. By the 1980s and 90s, however, Rich had reinvented himself as a mentor and activist, co-founding a nonprofit that aimed to give disillusioned youth a chance he never had. He died on August 22, 2020, in Englewood, New Jersey, at 94, ravaged by dementia that slowly stripped away the sharp mind that had defined him. His estate, worth roughly $1 to $2 million, included art holdings and modest savings, a quiet irony for a man who had once lost everything to political hysteria. Fran Drescher, born September 30, 1957, in Queens, New York, burst into American living rooms in 1993 at age 36 as Fran Fine, the nasal-voiced, leopard print-clad nanny from Flushing, who turned upper-class Manhattan on its head. The character was adored for her brash honesty and unconventional glamour, embodying a working-class boldness that challenged class snobbery while keeping audiences in stitches. But Drescher's own story was far darker than the glittering sitcom success. Growing up in a blue-collar Jewish family, she endured relentless bullying for her voice and appearance, forcing her to sharpen humor as a survival tool. Her career was a relentless tug-of-war with Hollywood executives who pigeonholed her as too New York, too nasal, too loud, and her biggest heartbreak came before The Nanny, when her early film career stalled after the 1981 flop Dr. Detroit and a traumatic 1985 home invasion in which she was assaulted, an event she spoke about only years later, but which left lifelong scars. On set, despite her bubbly image, she was rumored to be controlling, fiercely protective of creative control to the point of alienating some writers and producers. Her marriage to high school sweetheart Peter Mark Jacobson crumbled in 1999, with revelations of his hidden sexuality fueling a painful and public split that left her reeling. Later, her relationship with controversial figure Shiva Ayadurai raised eyebrows as critics questioned his credentials and motives. Her resilience was tested further with a uterine cancer diagnosis in 2000. Yet she clawed her way back, reinventing herself as an activist and, in time, as president of SAG-AFTRA, where her hard-nosed negotiation style was as divisive as it was admired. Now 67, she remains a powerful, polarizing figure. Her net worth of roughly $25 million, drawn from syndication royalties, real estate, and speaking tours. Unlike her character Fran Fine, who married into wealth, Drescher built hers brick by brick, her fortune shadowed by scars of survival and the whispers of Hollywood insiders who never stopped underestimating her. Charles Shaughnessy was born on February 9, 1955, in London, England, and began portraying Maxwell Sheffield in The Nanny in 1993 at age 38. On screen, he was the epitome of refinement. A wealthy Broadway producer, widowed father of three, his wit and charm slowly succumbing to Fran Fine's chaotic warmth. Fans adored his gradual transformation from aloof aristocrat to vulnerable romantic, a fantasy that played out weekly in millions of homes. Yet behind the perfect diction and noble family title, he is the fifth Baron Shaughnessy, lay insecurities rarely acknowledged. His childhood in a strict, aristocratic household was marked by distance, where appearances mattered more than affection, and laughter was rationed. Those shadows trailed him into adulthood. His career, though steady, was often one of near misses. He narrowly lost major roles on British television, was written out of storylines on soaps without explanation, and insiders recall his growing frustration with being typecast as the gentleman. The bitterest wound came when his post-Nanny career stalled. His starring role in a sitcom pilot collapsed after a scandal involving his rumored backstage arrogance and controlling behavior toward co-stars, though never officially confirmed. His personal life was quieter, but not free of turbulence. Marital strains with his longtime wife, Suzanne, were whispered about during the height of the show, with tabloids hinting at separations that were quickly denied. Losses of close friends and recurring health scares added fragility to his otherwise pristine image. Now at 70, still alive, he lives more reclusively between California and London, teaching occasional master classes in acting and guarding his privacy. His net worth, approximately $3 million, reflects steady but modest earnings compared to Hollywood royalty, with his legacy less about scandal and more about how close he came to superstardom without ever truly claiming it. Daniel Davis was born on November 26, 1945 in Gurdon, Arkansas, and began playing Niles in The Nanny in 1993 at age 48. The character, a razor-tongued butler whose sarcastic repartee masked deep loyalty, was adored by audiences, who relished his secret love for C.C. Babcock and his constant jousts with Fran. But Davis himself bore little resemblance to his wry alter ego. Raised in rural poverty, he endured ridicule for his interest in theater rather than sports, hiding much of his emotional life behind performance. His breakout on Broadway brought acclaim, but he was often described as intense and impossible to please. The darkest turn came in 2005 during La Cage aux Folles, when repeated reports of hostility toward co-stars and crew led to his dismissal from the production. a humiliation that followed him for years and branded him as volatile. Rumors swirled of temper-fueled clashes, alcohol-fueled nights that bled into morning rehearsals, and an obsessive perfectionism that alienated peers. His private life remained equally turbulent. Friends whispered of strained long-term relationships he never spoke publicly about, and Davis himself admitted to periods of crippling loneliness. The death of his parents weighed heavily, leaving him with few close relatives, and the stage became both refuge and battlefield. Still alive at 79, he now lives quietly, occasionally returning for Shakespearean productions and small television roles. His net worth, around $2 million, is modest compared to his legacy, a reminder of both his brilliance and the professional wreckage left by his infamous outbursts. His name endures more as a cautionary tale of genius undercut by temperament than as a Hollywood triumph. Lauren Lane was born on February 2, 1961, in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and began her role as CeCe Babcock in 1993 at age 32. CeCe, the sharp-tongued business partner and foil to Fran Fine, was the show's stylish antagonist, whose brittle ambition and acidic remarks masked loneliness, a complexity fans came to cherish. Lane, however, carried her own private contradictions. Raised in a fractured family, she grew up facing instability and financial scarcity, fueling her determination to break free. Early in her career, she struggled for recognition, bouncing between forgettable television parts and theater gigs, often dismissed by casting agents as too cold or too intimidating. The Nanny offered her breakthrough, but also conflict. Whispers circulated about her clashes with co-stars, particularly Davis, with whom her on-screen sparring sometimes boiled over off-camera. Some colleagues described her as fiercely ambitious, others as aloof and manipulative, with a reputation for holding grudges. After the series, a failed marriage ended in divorce, with friends hinting at bitter custody battles that left emotional scars. Rumors of ill-advised affairs and tensions within the cast haunted her, even as she transitioned to academia, where she reinvented herself as a respected theater professor. Tragedy struck with the loss of close family members, further fueling her retreat from Hollywood. Now 64, she lives away from the limelight, still teaching but seldom performing, her net worth ranging from $100,000 to $1 million, a sharp contrast to her glamorous screen image. Her story reflects the cruel irony of fleeting fame. Beloved for a role that defined her, yet left wrestling with the shadows of personal heartbreak, career disappointments, and an industry that quickly moved on. Steve Lawrence, born Sidney Leibowitz on July 8, 1935 in New York City, stepped into The Nanny in 1995 at age 60, slipping between playing himself and the almost mythical Morty Fine, Fran's father, who was more often talked about than seen. Morty was painted as loving but unreliable, a man who ducked family tensions with jokes and dodges, embodying the evasive charm that fans found both exasperating and endearing. Behind the role, Lawrence's life was anything but the sitcom fluff he projected. His childhood was shaped by hardship as the son of Jewish immigrants, struggling through the Depression, his early years marked by financial instability, and a father who pushed him relentlessly toward performance as an escape from poverty. The road to fame was not gilded. After initial success with his wife, 80 Gourmet, as part of the Stephen 80 Act, Lawrence wrestled with an industry that often dismissed him as yesterday's crooner, facing a sharp career decline in the late 1970s when the pop charts were overtaken by disco and rock. He endured bitter accusations of arrogance from colleagues, and his most devastating professional failure came in the form of a short-lived variety show canceled in 1965 after critics savaged his style as outdated. His personal life carried its own shadows. His marriage, while celebrated publicly, was strained by 80s resentment of his gambling habits and rumors of infidelity, while the 1986 death of his son, Michael, from a sudden illness, left scars he never publicly confronted. Friends spoke of a man torn between the polished entertainer on stage and a deeply melancholy private self, particularly as Alzheimer's slowly unraveled his memory in later years. He died on March 7, 2024 in Los Angeles at 88. His final years defined by a haunting mix of fading recognition and quiet dignity. His estate, estimated at $10 million, included music royalties, property holdings in Beverly Hills, and memorabilia that would later become prized at auctions, cementing his place as a performer who never escaped the weight of nostalgia. Nicholle Tom was born on March 23, 1978 in Hinsdale, Illinois, and began portraying Maggie Sheffield in The Nanny in 1993 at the age of 15. Maggie was the insecure, awkward eldest daughter of the Sheffield family, who blossomed into a graceful, confident young woman with Fran's guidance, making her a character audiences rooted for as they watched her transformation. Behind the camera, Nicholle's childhood was not as warm. She grew up in a broken household, her parents' separation leaving her to wrestle with feelings of abandonment and a desperate need for validation. That desperation carried into her early Hollywood career, where she was often dismissed as too soft-spoken, too plain compared to flashier peers, and endured humiliating rejections that made her question her worth. A darker side emerged in rumors of hostility toward fellow child actors, tantrums on set, and persistent whispers of alcohol misuse in her late teens, when she was allegedly escorted off studio lots more than once. Her biggest career blow came after losing a coveted leading role in a WB teen drama, which insiders say she lost after being deemed too unstable to headline. Her romantic life has been rocky, with fleeting relationships and reports of manipulative partners who exploited her fragility, leaving her in debt and emotionally scarred. She endured the death of close friends from overdoses and publicly admitted bouts of depression, but never fully broke into A-list status. Today at 47, she is still alive, scraping a living from occasional voice work and indie projects, while her net worth hovers around a modest $500,000. A far cry from the stardom once promised. Her story serving as a cautionary tale of Hollywood's merciless churn. Benjamin Salsbury was born on October 19, 1980, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and joined The Nanny in 1993 at age 13 to play Brighton Sheffield, the sarcastic, mischievous middle child who sparred endlessly with Fran, but ultimately grew to cherish her as a second mother figure. On screen, Benjamin was the comic spark, but off-screen his life was far less playful. As a child, he was teased for his small stature and nasal voice, fueling insecurity that lingered into adulthood. Despite The Nanny's success, Benjamin's acting career collapsed rapidly. Insiders recall his erratic behavior, a reputation for arrogance on set, and ugly fights with producers that made him radioactive in casting circles. After the show ended, his failed attempts to transition into film were punctuated by embarrassing auditions and rumors of a gambling problem that drained much of his early earnings. His personal life spiraled as well. His marriage, kept low profile, reportedly ended after infidelity accusations, and friends claimed he grew bitter watching his former co-stars outshine him. His biggest professional humiliation came when a network dropped him from a hosting gig after executives deemed him too unstable, a decision that all but ended his entertainment career. Struggling to reinvent himself, he quietly slipped into corporate work, ultimately finding refuge at Universal Studios Hollywood as director of operations. Now 44, he maintains an outwardly clean image, but his past remains littered with burned bridges and regrets. While his net worth, estimated at $1.5 billion, reflects stability earned not from fame, but from retreating behind the scenes. Madeline Zima was born on September 16, 1985, in New Haven, Connecticut, and began playing Grace Sheffield in The Nanny in 1993 at just 8 years old. Grace, the youngest Sheffield child, was precocious, neurotic, and endearing, clinging to Fran for comfort and comic relief, and viewers adored her intelligence beyond her years. Yet Madeline's real childhood was anything but secure. Her father's financial troubles and her mother's struggles left her thrust into acting as the family's breadwinner, and she endured taunts from classmates who mocked her for being the weird TV girl. That early pressure bred resentment and an icy competitiveness with her sisters, also actresses, as Madeline often accused them of stealing roles. Her transition from child star to adult actress was marked by scandalous turns in shows like Californication, where her explicit scenes shocked fans who had once adored her as innocent Grace. Industry insiders whispered about her fiery temper, a drinking habit that once caused her removal from a set, and volatile clashes with co-stars, painting her as both brilliant and difficult. Her most painful setback came when she was passed over for a major franchise film role after testing strongly, with producers citing her reputation risk, a career bruise she never fully recovered from. Her romantic history has been tumultuous, involving secret affairs with married partners and rumors of abusive dynamics that left her emotionally shaken. Despite personal chaos, she continued working, carving a niche in edgy television. At 40, she remains alive, unmarried, and still acting sporadically, with an estimated net worth of $5 million. Wealth built on relentless hustle, but shadowed by a reputation that Hollywood has never allowed her to outrun. Thank you for joining us on this nostalgic journey through classic television history. If you enjoyed learning about the cast of The Nanny and where they are now, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more vintage Hollywood retrospectives and share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your memories and suggestions, so let us know which TV show or movie cast you'd like us to feature next.